Today's video is going to diverge significantly from the usual format. Rather than focusing on a specific topic or a piece of reading, we're going to respond to some comments that have been left on the channel. It may come as no surprise to the audience that there are repeat offenders that touch on common themes. There are, of course, many comments that warrant little to no response, but the following appear so often that they justify some consideration. Part of the reason we're going off script today is because we have an important channel announcement. For now, we will just say that this video is brought to you by Means TV, a worker-owned anti-capitalist streaming service. Stay tuned for more information at the end of the video. To give credit to this argument, which we all know and love, the general thesis is as follows. A system that monetizes the research and development process gives individuals the incentive to put their time, effort, and resources into coming up with new things. This dynamic feature of capitalism is, in some part, completely true. It is also something Marx noted himself. The entire premise of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall rests on the assumption that capitalists are locked in a state of competition to out-innovate each other in order to secure windfall profits. Beyond this, though, there are a few problems with the economic incentives narrative. Firstly, how did humanity invent anything before the advent of money, markets, or capitalism? It seems very unlikely that early mathematicians, astronomers, or engineers developed new ideas or contraptions in anticipation of economic returns. Clearly, the wheel and the compass were not invented to generate revenue, but probably to address a necessity or simplify a task. One could argue that tools and ideas which make work easier produced a kind of economic reward by reducing the effort needed to carry out a job. This is a fair point, but it has little to do with the specific nature of markets or capitalism. Such innovation can and has occurred in any type of society. Also, many modern technologies we rely on originated in research funded or conducted by governments. This includes computers and the internet, which came out of American military labs, and satellites, which were of course pioneered by the USSR, a socialist state. The reason for heavy government involvement in research is very simple. Research is typically very open-ended and does not guarantee immediate returns on investment, if any at all. For that reason, private entities are typically wary of putting money into innovation. In other words, it is the very logic of the market, which necessitates profit maximization, that limits private enterprises from innovating on their own. This is what economists typically call a positive externality, and the prescribed solution is government funding of activities that private companies don't invest enough in. Beyond relying on funding to keep research going, companies and entrepreneurs in the so-called free market need to make sure that their ideas aren't just immediately swept away by their peers or competitors. They need a third party that is capable of stepping in and saying, no, this specific design or idea belongs to this individual, you may not use it for your own business. Otherwise, all the benefits from innovating are immediately dissipated away through competition. The problem is, this third-party enforcer has to carry a credible threat to actually enforce ownership over an idea. You may already know who that third-party enforcer might be. Yes, it is the state. In an actual free market, there would be no real way to protect intellectual property. There is zero weight in a patent without a central body that can define and enforce it. This is all to say, it is not innovation which needs a profit motive, but rather the profit motive which needs the government to guarantee the privatization of ideas. The privatization of ideas is actually a huge hindrance to innovation. Anyone working in research can tell you that paywalls and restricted access to information actively hurts the kind of information sharing that is needed for new ideas to build off of old ones. This is why you'll see a lot of people who actually do science for a living advocate for the democratization of access to information. The final point worth thinking about here relates to what humanity's innate motivations for innovation really are. Was Einstein really motivated by money when he revolutionized physics? Incidentally, we can answer this question confidently in the negative because Einstein was an outspoken socialist who had very few nice things to say about capitalism. But let's not digress. This is ultimately a pretty important question. What drives us to seek out new ways to do things or new perspectives on the world? Certainly, prestige, recognition, and monetary gain are not to be discounted here, but surely people innovate out of passion for their fields or a fundamental curiosity about the world we live in. In some cases, innovators have contributed to humanity in spite of any economic incentives, dying in destitution and loneliness, only for their work to be recognized and appreciated posthumously. So a few thoughts come to mind after reading this one, and many others like it. There's definitely something appealing about looking at cases like West and East Germany and North and South Korea. After all, they were once a single country, only to be split up and ruled by different regimes. This presents itself as a nice laboratory experiment that is typically very rare in the social sciences. Ideally, we can hold all things equal and say, well, South Korea was run as a capitalist country and North Korea was run as a socialist country. The different outcome in the standards of living speaks for itself. The problem here is that we cannot actually hold all things equal and make this assessment. While both countries were ravaged by war, North Korea was systematically obliterated by American bombing runs, which killed upwards of 1 in 5 people and destroyed the majority of infrastructure, things like dams, villages, industry, etc. Despite this, it looked for a while after the war like North Korea was faring better than the South, which until the 80s was an underdeveloped authoritarian state with questionable prospects for improvement. After losing support from the USSR and being increasingly isolated from the rest of the world, North Korea fell starkly behind. But why bring all of this up? Because it muddles the implicit claim here of a methodologically sound comparison. We cannot pose a plausible enough counterfactual given an entire history of extenuating circumstances. Would North Korea have developed otherwise if it was the capitalist state and the South was socialist? There's no way to actually answer this question without simply speculating and engaging in uninformative, deductive reasoning. In general, comparative analyses are fraught with these types of incongruities. You could, for instance, make the same kind of argument in reverse for China and India. Both countries exited the Second World War under similar developmental conditions. Whereas China came under the leadership of a communist party, India was governed at first by a big tent party which flirted with socialist ideas, but ultimately distanced itself from anything radical. Both countries were overwhelmingly agrarian and had access to an almost infinite supply of labor. Yet China clearly wields far more economic power today than India does. The outcomes of both countries are the result of complex historical developments, and we shouldn't chalk it all up to simplifications with strained reasoning. It is also worth noting that many of capitalism's success stories were driven first and foremost by strong state involvement. The governments of South Korea and Japan, for instance, were invasively involved in various markets in order to protect and develop strategic industries. There are several published studies which show that this kind of heavy-handed intervention helped get the East Asian economies to where they are today. Finally, on the point of success stories, it is suspect that these types of comments almost always point to the small handful of affluent capitalist countries and neglect or excuse away the dozens of underdeveloped economies, which never got off the ground despite following the official rulebook of the World Bank, the IMF, and Washington itself. Why has capitalism failed countless countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and Europe? This kind of differential outcome seems equally, if not more, important to investigate. This commenter offers us some insightful alternatives to wage labor. For instance, instead of taking a job, we can live off the land. But whose land? There are very few places in the world today, especially in the so-called developed world, where you can just squat in the woods and build a cabin. Something like 99% of land on Earth is owned publicly or privately. You could, of course, buy your own land, but you'll probably need a job to raise the money for that. Starting your own business has far fewer barriers than living in the woods by yourself. For some, it may become a viable escape from wage labor forever. This doesn't exactly fix the social problem of wage labor and private property in general. It just fixes the situation for one person. If everyone starts a successful small business, where will all of these businesses find people to staff their enterprises? The reality is, one worker exiting the supply side of the labor market does not change the fact that there is a class of people that sells its ability to labor to another class of people, which has the right to the entire surplus created in society. For moving to another country, see the first point about resources needed to make that happen. Considering that the median balance in an American checkings account is roughly $3,000, it's hard to imagine how far a disillusioned worker would be able to get if they chose to leave their home. Ultimately, the advent of capitalism necessarily involved separating the majority of people from the means of sustaining themselves independently. This was needed to create a class of people that had to work for a living. The existence of this class is continuously reinforced by the laws, norms, and economic pressures that shape the society we live in. Let's end with a non-theoretical comment, but one that gets thrown around often enough to invite a response. The first part of the claim is simply not true. Marx actually held many jobs throughout his life, most notably as a journalist for various newspapers, such as the New York Daily Tribune. He authored hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces for which he received payment. Receiving payment for work done is as good a definition for a job as any. But Marx did live off the graces of his friend Engels. He also inherited a reasonable sum of money from his family. However, he used this money to support himself in periods when employment was very difficult to secure. Because he was so critical of the authoritarian regimes in Europe in his time, he was forced to relocate from one place to another, and this obviously complicated his employment prospects. It is possible that what is meant in this comment is that Marx never held a job involving manual labor. That may well be true, but it is also the case for virtually every thinker in recorded history. Because of the nature of class society, and this is an insight we can draw on thanks to Marx, most thinking in history has been advanced by privileged individuals. Even in Marx's time, literacy was not a guarantee. Even more rare was the kind of advanced education needed to contribute to contemporary theoretical discourse. There is a potentially interesting critique here, namely, how much has this position of privilege affected the study of society? How might these theories have looked if they were produced by laborers rather than wealthy merchants or nobles? Still, if we want to reject Marx's contribution on these grounds, we'd be forced to throw out all the other theories as well, from Smith and Ricardo to Menger and Walras. Nevertheless, it would be wrong to suggest that Marx was not working when living off of Engels' money. Marx produced thousands upon thousands of pages of analysis on a broad range of topics, much of which has been published into some of the most influential books of modern history. Whether you agree with him or not, Marx's work has had a lasting impact on the social sciences and politics in general. His influence is present even in areas where most people might not expect it. To conclude with an illustrative example, it was Marx's writing on dialectics which influenced the theory and practice of Sergei Eisenstein's prolific career in cinema. Eisenstein interpreted Marx's dialectic in cinema by clipping two contrasting shots together back to back, in order to create a clash symbolizing the resolution of contradictions in a synthesis. In other words, Marx's writing is a creative ancestor to the very concept of montage. Hopefully this has been an enjoyable interruption from the not-so-regularly scheduled programming. Although these types of comments are a bit trite, it's still nice to entertain the critiques that might be embedded in them. As promised, we have an announcement to make. As of today, the Marxist Project will be available on Means TV. The channel will be in good company on the platform, with the likes of Second Thought, Hakim, Luna, Mexi, and many others making up a great selection of content. Means also produces some phenomenal original content, including a regular news segment hosted by Sam Sachs, and the highly entertaining animated series Papa and Boy, which we wholeheartedly recommend. The decision to join Means TV was very simple. Not only is Means worker-owned, but it is a platform with explicitly anti-capitalist politics. The very earliest vision for the Marxist Project was to eventually create a home for a broad range of left-wing political education resources. While this vision ended up being too ambitious for us, we are excited to see Means TV becoming exactly what we were picturing when we first started this channel. As Means TV grows and brings on more creators, we know that it will become an indispensable alternative for leftist media. If you want to help Means TV achieve that goal and enjoy its excellent selection of content, we strongly encourage you to sign up for a membership. By clicking the link below and signing up, you would be supporting both Means TV and our channel. The link offers you 20% off your first month, or 20% off the annual plan. We see this as a win-win-win. By subscribing, you would be paying into the establishment of an alternative, anti-capitalist media space. You would also be directly supporting our channel. And, of course, you would be getting access to incredible content. If you are able to spare $7 a month, this is an excellent use of that money.